All right, so we're going to start with our first skill, which is NS1. NS1 is talking about adding and subtracting rational numbers, but most of the time we're going to be talking about them in real life situations. So the first problem, we have during a football game, Freddie Jackson loses 6 yards on the first down and then gains 4 yards during the second down. In that sentence, we're trying to find all the key words and phrases that we need to use to add and subtract. So I see the word loses. I see 6 yards. Then is a good conjunction. We have gains and 4 yards. Let's figure out what they want us to do. Show what Freddie Jackson needs to do on the third down to make his team be back where they started. Started means what? If we're on a number line, started always means 0. Think about football. Line of scrimmage. So let's draw a number line. This is going to be our best way to explain where all these numbers are coming from. So where did we say that started means? 0. So the first thing he did was he lost 6 yards, which is a negative. So we're going to go backwards 6 yards. So 2, 4, 6. Negative 6. Then, that conjunction, he gains. What is gain telling us? We're adding. But where are we starting from? Are we starting from the 0 or the negative 6? Well, think about where the ball is. Right now, they're still at negative 6. So we're going to move up and come backwards because he's gaining 4 yards. So 2, 4. Well, where are they right now on the field? We are at a negative 2. So the question says, how much further do they need to go back where they started? So this is distance. Distance is always what? Positive. So we're talking about absolute value. So how many steps is it going to take to get from negative 2 to 0? 2. All right, let's move on. It says, using a number line, show the distance between 5 and 25 hundredths and negative 15 and 75 hundredths. So first of all, it's telling us to use a number line. Remember, one of our standards is you must use a number line to be able to add and subtract. And we're showing distance. We just reviewed, what does distance always tell us? Positive. And what's that vocab word that we use when we're talking about distance? Absolute value. So let's use a number line. Remember in my class we always talk about number lines are important to have a 0 so you know where you're talking about. We're going to plot our points. So we have a positive 5 and 25 hundredths. And we have a negative 15 and 75 hundredths. So it's asking us the distance between one point to the other. So think about in the hallway. If I'm walking from my room to Mr. Wilson's room, or if we're walking from Mr. Wilson's room back to my room, it's still going to be a positive number, even if you're walking backwards. It does not matter. So if we're talking about how many steps does it take us to get to 0, how many steps is that going to take us? Well, it should be the absolute value of negative 15 and 75 hundredths, which is a positive 15 and 75 hundredths. Well, what about on the right side? How many steps is it going to take to get us from 5 back to 0? 1, 2, 5. So we're still doing the absolute value because it's a distance is still going to be 5 and 25 hundredths. So we have both of our distances from left to right, but we want to know the entire distance. So from beginning to end, we would just add together. So 15 75/100ths plus 5 25/100ths, which I know that these two things make a whole. So we're going to carry one whole. We have 16 plus 5. My board's crazy. Which is 21. So the total distance is 21. We also could have done this by subtracting, because it wants to know our distance. So if we look in still at our number line, we could say positive 5.25, or 5 25/100ths, minus, because we're going in this direction, minus a negative 15 75/100. Well, what do we do when we have subtraction and then a negative? Good, additive inverse. So now all we have are two positive numbers. So we're going to add them just like we did before, and our answer is still 21. All right, so now that you have used number 1 and number 2 to help you guide you through the next one, let's see what you should have done first. I'm going to slide this all the way down. Okay, so this one had multiple steps. So let's first read it. So we're dealing with a chart. We have quarters and we have total yards. So it's always important to look at our headings. It says the table shows the statistics of a running back in a football game. How many total yards did he run the entire game? So what is total yards telling us? Well, total is usually telling us that we're going to have to add everything together. So what did we add together? Well, if it were me, I would add my like terms. So I would add all my positive numbers first. So I have 42 1/2 plus 23. Now the most important rule when adding and subtracting fractions is what? You must have a common denominator. But in this situation, we're just adding them together. So think about if you have 42 1/2 pizzas plus 23 pizzas, it doesn't matter what the half and where it's going. So you're just going to carry it straight down, add up. So we know that overall, the running back ran for a positive 65 1/2 yards. But we still haven't used other information. Make sure you're always using everything from the table. So let's talk about our negatives. I'm going to use red because I'm sure his coach wasn't happy with him. So we have a negative 8 1/2 plus a negative 2 1/4. Now from our mathemaniacs, we know that a negative plus a negative is just a further negative. So we know we're just combining all of our negatives together. So now we have two fractions without the same common denominator. So let's make these common denominators first. I'm going to make this into 2/4. How did we do that? Multiply by 2. Multiplied by 2. Okay, so now that's done. So we can just start adding them all together. So 2/4 plus 1/4 is going to get us 3/4. And 8 plus 2 is going to get us 10. So we have a negative 10 3/4 yards. But remember, we're still trying to combine these together. So we're still combining, which means we're still adding them together. Now from our mathemaniac, we also know that when we have a positive and a negative number, what do we end up having to do? We're going to subtract. So we're going to do the absolute values. We're going to subtract the absolute values. So you have 65 1/2 minus 10 3/4. Once again, we want to have the same common denominators. So we're going to just bump this up to 2/4. I'm writing over my equal sign here. 2/4. Can we do 2/4 minus 3/4? Well, we could, but it'd be easier if we just took a whole yard away from him. So we're going to make this into 64 yards and take 4/4 and add it to our 2/4. So we have 4 plus 2 is 6. So let's erase this. And now we have 64 and 6/4. Okay, now we have the same common denominators, and now we can subtract. So 6 minus 3 is 3/4. And 64 minus 10 is 54. So it's asking overall how many yards did he have? He ran a total of 54 and 3/4 yards, which isn't too bad.